excited to be here and to share with everyone. And thanks, Dr. Ho, for a great presentation on the physical recovery. And so on some level, we're going to switch from the physical into the mental realm. And yeah, just share a little bit about, some of the research studies that are out there regarding spinal cord injury and mental health, the relationship there. And then I thought, as a way to just share some tools, go into CBT a little bit, cognitive behavioral therapy. So I'll just go ahead and open up my slides here and then dive in. So yeah, as Casey mentioned, I'm a registered psychologist. So I've been in private practice for the last about 7 or 8 years. And I was injured many years ago, about almost 25 years ago now, when I was younger. And I ended up going to school and falling in love with psychology and, realizing that there was definitely an area that I could learn in and develop in. And so did some really cool research with youngsters and self-regulatory practices, helping people to, get better with their breathing and their heart rate variability patterns and all these things. So that led me into, the world of clinical practice and working with ultimately with families. So a whole bunch of, dynamics within families, and then group therapy, family therapy, one-on-one therapy, couples therapy, kind of a broad range. And then of course, along the way, it's only a fraction of my practice, but I do help people with spinal cord injury from time to time. Currently on my caseload, I would have a couple of those people. And so I'm fairly familiar with some of the challenges that come up, both professionally and then personally as well. So to begin, just to kind of quickly dive in and, just a, lay of the land here, I'd like to address some of the challenges with anxiety, isolation, depression that the SCI community faces on a regular basis. It's pretty common stuff. And because, we are a particularly vulnerable population, mental health concerns often directly impact our daily life. And, I'll touch on a few of the studies that are out there, and then I'd like to, flip through CBT as kind of the most popular form of mental health out there. And there are so many tools that you might be able to share with your patients. So I'll discuss a couple of those as well. But, to begin, again, the research community has been at this for quite some time. But there are some great studies out there that, indicate that there is a really strong correlation between having this kind of injury and then struggling with mental health issues, whether it's depression, anxiety, stress, PTSD, and that really, we're basically twice as likely to have these conditions as the quote unquote, other populations. So it's really high. It's really important. And so again, they, have studied this over time. This particular study looks at, from injury from onset to 5 years after discharge from the hospital. And again, tracking these challenges, all these mental health problems and diagnoses that come. And I know that over the years, when I was first injured 25 years ago, there was a psychologist on staff, and it was optional to see her. But I think over time, things have changed quite a bit, and there's more and more awareness, more and more resources available. And still the big challenge, though, is ultimately, the medical system hasn't quite, even though there's a lot of talk about the importance of mental health, it's still often, either you're left with trying to find services where there are long wait lists through AHS, or you have to move into my kind of circle, which is private practice, which typically for people is not cheap. So again, the challenge is there in terms of trying to find providers and people that can help with these issues. And again, here we're looking at the role of socioeconomic conditions and social relationships and how important that is in having this spinal cord injury. And I'm just wondering if you can see me here. I'm going to see if I can get my video. I don't know if I can do that. Well, I guess you can have a look at me after we're doing all this with just the screen. But again, there's lots of evidence that these, socioeconomic conditions and inequalities really powerfully impact, people's mental health and their ability to cope and think properly. Again, people with spinal cord injuries, traumas have these, often psychological morbidities and typically, they're grouped together, right? It's not just one or the other. Often anxiety, depression will go together. You might get, substance use issues that start happening, and as an effort to mitigate the, anxieties or depressions. Often insomnia is a big challenge. So again, lot of these issues, a lot of problems, and to be honest, reading through it is a little depressing, because you think, oh my goodness, this is quite the wallop for people going through, not just physically but mentally, right? And of course with the families, and it's not just the person with spinal cord injury going through it. It's often the family, the parents, the spouses, siblings, friends, struggling with these kinds of things. This is one of the more recent studies. This was published in January, and big numbers. 1 million people as kind of as a control group, and then about almost 10,000 people with spinal cord injury. And again, seeing that there's a lot of struggle with mental health, and especially when you add neuropathic pain, that tends to increase it by quite a bit as well. Oops. So again, the takeaway from these studies and many others would be that we have a almost 80% increased risk of developing psychological conditions compared to people without the injury, and that chronic pain, isolation, financial struggles, inequalities have an equally large negative effect on mental health. So again, it's something that we need to address. We are starting to address more and more, but arguably that this research shows that there's a very clear need for developing better social supports and psychological supports available to people, and then also, as I say, tools that people can use, tap into. And the great thing is that so many of these tools are now becoming available online through apps or through websites. Great stuff out there that can help people. So again, just very briefly, there are many different approaches to psychotherapy. In the literature, I think there are over 400 different approaches to therapy, whether it's CBT kind of being one of the more common, but that would be third wave psychology. Second wave psychology being more behavioral interventions, and first wave being the more psychoanalytic approach, and then humanistic therapies also have entered the scene. And now more than ever, most people practice in a more integrative sense, using a lot of the different approaches and styles of therapy to help people, depending on what the person needs or gravitates towards. But again, I'm just going to briefly go into CBT. I know many of you have heard of it. You may have even gone through it yourselves. I'm not sure, is this?
Mark, it's Casey. We're just going to share your slides here. We weren't seeing them, and we've had some people ask. Is that okay? That
you're not seeing my slides? Oh, shoot.
Yeah, no, so we're going to do that for you right now.
Oh, that's terrible. Oh, no. Okay.
We got it under control.
You're a good speaker. We didn't need your slides, Mark.
Well, that's very flattering. Wow. My grizzly quad voice. Yeah, that's very sweet. So, and how do I share these? Am I able to, or do I have to tell you to flip, Casey? How does it work?
Can you see right now we have the mental health and individuals with spinal cord injury.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you like us to flip to the next one, or is this the one you'd like to speak on?
Yeah, please go ahead. I went through this one. You can flip the next one. That was, again, the most recent one. Next. Next. These are the different approaches to therapy. Next. Sorry about this. I apologize. It looked like it was working properly on my end. Sorry to leave everyone hanging. So are you okay, Casey, if I just say next every time? Does that work?
That works really well. Thanks.
Okay. So again, CBT based, again, a cognitive approach based on principles, including psychological problems are based in part on faulty thinking or unhelpful ways of thinking. That psychological problems are based in part on learned patterns of unhelpful behavior. And that people suffering from psychological problems can learn better ways of coping with them, thereby relieving their symptoms and becoming more effective in their lives. So again, a very hopeful approach. And I'm cognizant of not falling into the trap of saying to everybody, well, if you just think better, then you'll be okay, because a lot of the issues that we're dealing with in the spinal cord injured population are very real, very difficult, very troubling. And so a lot of validation and empathy is in order. And, and then a nudge towards, thinking and being more perhaps clever with the way you interpret or tell the story about what's going on for you and your family and as a result of the injury. Next, Casey. So again, here we can intervene at these various different levels, whether it's through thinking or behaving or emoting, and that all of these, will affect the way the others work, right? So you can feel a certain way or alter feeling, which will change the way you think and the way you behave, and vice versa, all the way around the circle. Next, Casey. So the list of cognitive distortions, and these are just a few. They've identified many, many, many. Some are used in practice. Some are just more scholarly intrigue. But again, we all tend to fall into these traps, and we all have these struggles with our thinking, part of the human condition. And so again, the promise is that by looking more closely at these distortions or the thinking traps, that we can, alleviate some of the suffering and get more clarity on what's more real versus false. Next, Casey. So I'll just go through quickly some of the common distortions. So all or nothing thinking, which is, again, very, very common for us, also known as black and white thinking. This distortion manifests as an inability or unwillingness to see shades of gray. In other words, you see things in terms of extremes. Something is either fantastic or awful. You believe you are either perfect or a total failure. And again, this is going to show up a lot with your patients. My life is over. I'm a quadriplegic or I'm a paraplegic or got a spinal cord injury, and now I'm done, right? And that might not be the case. Next slide. Overgeneralization, again, something we all do very commonly. This is a sneaky distortion and takes one instance or example and then generalizes it to an overall pattern. So for instance, perhaps the person with spinal cord injury suffers from a bowel accident, might generalize this to being a shameful person. Overgeneralizing can lead to overly negative thoughts about yourself and your environment based on only one or two experiences. And again, you can probably identify how you might do this in your own life, and that, people with spinal cord injury are likely to do the same. And again, so I'll get into how to work with this after, but we'll go through the list. Next, Casey. Negative filters, again, pretty common stuff. We all tend to, at times put on those blue glasses and everything looks blue. And we ignore the positives. You might receive many compliments. This is a very common one. Oh, you did a really great presentation. Oh, it was such a wonderful talk. And wow, but then someone said, you weren't speaking loudly enough. Oh, suddenly that's the most important thing. And suddenly you decide to just, focus on that and forget about the other good stuff that's happening. So again, we all know this. Next slide, Keith. Jumping to conclusions or mind reading, fortune telling. Again, this is a way to, trick ourselves into thinking that we know what's going on. And, not always true, right? We assume we understand what someone's thinking, but oftentimes it's better to maybe check that or ask or find out for real what's going on. Example, again, that many of your patients will face, instance, going to the mall in your wheelchair and assuming that everyone's looking at you with negative judgment and thinking, oh, look at this poor person, or oh, they're so pathetic, or they're so sad, or and then it makes it hard to roll through the mall because you have this stuff coming at you, mostly internally. Next slide, Casey. Catastrophizing, and this is again very common. It's making something into a catastrophe when it's not. We catastrophize, tell ourselves something is so awful, so terrible that we won't be able to handle it, that we'll fall apart or die. And the more we tell ourselves that the problems we're facing are catastrophes, the more hopeless and helpless we feel. Obviously, it becomes a mountain instead of a molehill. And, another instance, I'm late for an appointment. Therefore, the whole day is a mess. I'm a mess. Life is a mess. Oh my goodness. It's all going to sink, right? And again, very natural, very common tendency for us to have, but something to be aware of and try to catch at some point. Next slide, Casey. Should statements, I should be doing this, I should be feeling this. Again, that's something that in the land of quadriplegia, spinal cord injury, paraplegia is super common, right? I shouldn't be in a wheelchair. Life should have been better to me. I should be feeling better. I should be more like that other person with spinal cord injury. I'm not doing as well as them. The land of comparisons in SCI is pretty intense stuff. I've got a client or a patient I'm working with right now, and that's one of his big struggles. He continues to feel that other people with the injury are doing better than he is, and that he's a failure. He's not living up to his potential, and so we're working on this to try and help him kind of reorient and recalibrate some of his perspectives. Next, Casey. Labeling, mislabeling. Again, these are ways to assign value judgments to ourselves and others based on experiences, one or two often. And again, so you label yourself as a loser or weak or broken, and you kind of cling to that, right? And again, it's not to say that it's not totally true. Well, yeah, you did break your neck, so I guess technically from one perspective you're broken, but that doesn't mean that you're as a whole broken, right? As a person. And so again, try to nudge and navigate these labels, these terms that we can, I think, egoistically stick to and hang on to. Again, part of identity formation. I could go on and on, but I won't bore you with the technicals. But again, this is something to be aware of. Next slide, Casey. Personalization. Again, it's thinking that you're the cause of everything that's happening around you, and it's again very common, right? And it's a way to make life harder for yourself, essentially, right? By assuming that everything is your fault or you're the reason for this or that, when oftentimes that's not true. Next slide, Casey. So what are we supposed to do when we get caught up in these thinking traps? Ultimately, CBT is inviting us to investigate, question, check the reality, challenge, and ultimately tell another story. Something that is a bit more optimistic, hopeful, and perhaps truer. Next slide, Casey. So this thought-checking, challenging procedure is, again, one way to tackle some of this stuff. And it's easy to do. It's quick. Once you learn how to do it, it can be very helpful. And again, with lots of apps and tools out there, you can share with your patients and say, hey, maybe download this app and you can try going through this. Although again, it's tricky stuff, because in psychology, there's a joke. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Just one, but the light bulb has to want to change. So again, the idea that, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. And, you might suggest some of these tools and say, hey, maybe you're falling into a bit of that overgeneralization, or, but oftentimes you're going to get some kickback and maybe not as much buy-in as you'd like, until the person is really ready to engage this stuff and wants help from a psychologist or a psychological system. So, okay, I'm rambling a little bit, thought checking. So here's an example of a situation. So I'm not able to go to the mall and socialize with my friends because of difficulty traveling caused by SCI. So next slide, Casey. So how do you feel about this situation? Well, I feel angry, I feel anxious, I feel lonely, I feel depressed. So you're supposed to rank those, those feelings on a scale from 1 to 10 or 1 to 100. And let's choose anxiety, for instance. And we say, I feel really anxious. It makes me, I'm 90 on my scale. Next slide. And so then you say, well, what thought or concern was going through my mind when I started to feel this way? And if you look at it, you say something like, well, this will never end, as if my life with a spinal cord injury isn't hard enough already. Why does life have to be so unfair? And again, that interpretation of the event would cause anxiety, depression, all these things. Next slide, Casey. So then you identify which distortions that you've perhaps fallen into. And out of the little list that I've shown, we might say overgeneralization and catastrophizing. You pick those two. Next slide, Casey. And then you're invited to think about another way to think about the situation without distortions. So perhaps another sentence or phrase or thought would be, there's no doubt that this is a challenging situation, but I've managed challenging times in the past. I'll find a way through this. Okay, so that perhaps feels a little more hopeful. And again, you don't have to just sort of throw labels on it. You want to try and get to something that feels actually true for you or more true. Next slide, Casey. So again, to summarize the situation, it's not being able to go to the mall and socialize because of difficulty traveling caused by SCI. And the modified thought is, there's no doubt this is challenging, but I've managed challenging times in the past. I'll find a way through this. Next slide. And then you re-rank the feelings, right? You say, okay, now how anxious do I feel about this? Well, maybe I've dropped down 30 points to 60. It's not as bad. I don't feel as anxious. Maybe not as depressed, maybe not as angry. Next slide, Casey. So again, this is not really, again, the CBT approach, and there's a lot more to it. Again, I've done injustice to the whole model by making it so brief. But again, it's not a way to say to people, well, just think more positively and you'll be better. Someone with spinal cord injury is likely to roll their eyes and say, well, thanks so much, see you later. But it is an invitation to kind of look more deeply, to clarify, to think perhaps more complexly about what's going on. And again, normalizing the situation, because we all do this stuff as practitioners, as parents, as citizens. We fall into these cognitive distortions all the time. They're just part of the way our minds work. And again, it's taking time to think about it when we start feeling lousy, kind of, okay, well, what am I thinking? Maybe I should challenge some of this stuff. Next slide, Casey. So again, I won't go through this, but here's the situation. You have your initial thought, you identify the distortions, you try and modify the thought or think about it differently, and then you reassess how you're feeling. And then you might have to go through that loop a couple of times to get to something that feels more healthy. Next slide, Casey. So here, Mood Notes for iPhone is one of them. It's a great app. It's got lots of really good stuff inside of it. And it's got this whole procedure lined up really easily. So you can click, you can write the note, you can identify the feelings, you can identify the thought traps, you can, kind of reassess, you can journal, and there are all these invitations to, to do behavioral interventions. So it's a really great app. And again, it's more researched. A lot of mental health apps out there aren't really that well studied, or they don't come from university settings. So these guys are better that way. Mindshift for Android, Mindshift is on iPhone as well. But that's another one. Typically, maybe a little bit more for adolescents, but also very much for adults. So again, a good couple of apps there for you. Next slide, Casey. This Way Up is a really cool group out of Australia, and they have online courses that you can go through, and really, really good stuff that addresses, things like insomnia, anxiety, depression, all kinds of things. And so people can sign up, and then as a practitioner, you can sign up as well, and then you can track how your patient's doing, or you can join them and help them, work through it and see how they're progressing, if they're progressing. So it's a really cool tool for practitioners, and great for patients as well. Feeling Good, the new mood therapy, that's kind of a classic in the field. David Burns, his whole area is CBT, and some good stuff in there. Again, that can be an audiobook or a hard copy, whatever you need, or ebook. And then if you're looking for a therapist, obviously you can go through the PAA or different things, the Psychology Association of Alberta. But Psychology Today is a good resource. That's where people can kind of click and look around and find somebody if they're looking for private practice. Next slide, Casey. And then I just, again, wanted to say that, CBT is just one way to help, right? There are a lot of different modalities and all kinds of other stuff too. We didn't talk at all about medication, didn't talk at all about scales or how to sort of, track mental health issues. And again, I just didn't have time for all that. But, I stumbled across this one, kind of interesting stuff, a fecal transplant, helping people well, in this case, rats, deal with anxiety-like behavior. So basically by sort of repopulating the microbiome with, quote unquote, healthier diversity and different bacteria, you can actually, affect the way people are feeling. And this area of research, as you probably have heard, is growing quite a bit, the kind of gut-brain connection and the idea that our digestive system and what's going on there does affect our mood, our mental health, the way we think and feel. Next slide, Casey. So that's it. Again, I could talk a lot more. I know we're short on time, so if you want to connect with me, that's my little personal website, and then I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter. Happy to connect with you that way also. So thank you so much for hearing me out. And I'll open up for questions if we have any.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I'm sorry, I don't know why you can't see me. It's so
Not to worry, not to worry. I do have a couple questions here. Thank you for putting up your slide there for folks to be able to connect with you. And written down here. So first question is, do you do online sessions, and are your services affordable for people on restricted income?
Yeah, this is tough stuff. I mean, I do some pro bono stuff. I do some sliding scale, but again, being in private practice, it's hard to do that all the time. So I can only have a few patients on my caseload doing that. But again, there are other tools and resources. I should have shared more of those with you, but maybe I can send that out to the group later. Of course, yeah, online is typically the way a lot of us have been practicing this last couple of years. I had actually studied it several years ago, again, just partly because of the injury and facility with this stuff. So yeah, I mean, online works super well. Research studies demonstrate that it is, equally effective to face-to-face in-person stuff. So yeah.
You kind of already answered my second question. I've had a request to get a hard copy of the slides.
Sure. Yep. Happy to send that out. Absolutely.
Perfect. And next question, do you think the same processes and self-examination strategies could be used to promote practice change among healthcare practitioners?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Again, I think we all do it. It wouldn't be hard to identify feelings of, let's say, overgeneralization or any of these cognitive traps within the organization of AHS, for instance. I'm guessing that there are some times when you feel like the system isn't working properly, and maybe there are things that happen between colleagues where you feel like, holy shit, I need some help here. And yeah, absolutely, we all need to use these tools, right? Again, this is the human condition. So again, it's accentuated. It's even more, let's say, urgent or necessary for people with spinal cord injury to be using this stuff and aware of it and tapping into it. But yeah, I mean, I always say, look around, tell me someone who doesn't have problems that couldn't use a little help to think more clearly or more poetically about their lives. But again, I'm biased, I'm a shrink, so that's the kind of stuff I say, right?
I love it. Next question. In general, how do you suggest rehab clinicians support patients' mental health outside of formal psychology sessions? Yeah,
for sure. Well, that's a big one. And again, because of the price, because of, again, it's more accessible now because of being able to do it online. I bet you 95% of the practitioners out there would offer virtual therapy, whether it's over the phone or on video, whatever it might be. But that's where, again, these tools like the app that a couple of apps I shared, and again, there are many others, but also that website, This Way Up, again, is a great resource for people. They can use that for free, or if they want more in depth, they could pay a little bit of money. But that's again, a really great place to start if you're looking to say, hey, here's a thing, you want to maybe check that out. And that way a patient can do it on their own terms and not feel like you're gonna, okay, let's go through the list of thinking traps that you're going through here, and eye roll, whatever. Yeah.
Perfect. No, thank you again for all of those resources. And we just have one other question here. In your perspective, peer support in the community can help. Sorry, I just had a pop up. In your perspective, peer support in the community can help people to be more open to explore and address their mental health issues. So sorry, I guess they're asking, can peer support in the community, oh geez, I butchered that. In your perspective, yeah, peer support in the community can help people to be more open to explore and address their mental health issues. issue.
Maybe. Yeah, again, it really depends on the readiness. There's another theory in psychology, readiness for change, right? Either you're, pre-contemplative, or you're contemplating, or you're preparing, or you're ready for action. And, I can remember going to a barbecue early on when I was injured years and years ago, and, meeting some people with spinal cord injury. And again, it's pretty typical to feel like, okay, this is a group that I don't really want to be in. This sucks, and then other times it can be like, wow, this is so important to hear, other people that are going through the same kind of stuff I'm going through. And wow, what a relief, what a validation to hear that I'm not alone dealing with these feelings and these issues, so it can really go either way. It really depends on the person. And again, I wouldn't suggest hammering on this mental health stuff with people and saying, you really got to do this, or you really ought to do it. It's being more sly and more, invitational, like, oh, here's an app, or here's a thing, maybe, let me know if it's cool, or, that kind of stuff, right? Instead of heavy-handed.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Marc, for joining us today.
Yeah, a pleasure. I'm sorry you couldn't see my beautiful face today, because you really missed out.
No, we actually saw your face.
Oh, you did? Oh, it is here. Okay.
We just couldn't see your slides, so don't worry. We captured
Okay.
that.
All right.
But thank you so much. And thank you everyone for asking questions.